I have been talking about Brexit for a very, very long time on this channel. And sometimes when we talk about like the consequences of Brexit, it's like, guess what? Sky is blue, water is wet, earth is earthy. I didn't know what to say about Earth then, but it's earthy. Um, yeah, surprise, surprise, shock, horror. Um, yeah, we were right. There are going to be and have been big economic consequences for the decision to leave the European Union. There was a call not too long ago on LBC. If you had a guy who was like, and again, finally, it is good to see again someone who voted for leave to say this. That we should be blaming people like David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, because they gave a decision that had huge, huge, monumental political, economic, diplomatic consequences, which it was very obvious, as he stated, he did not understand. He did not understand the consequences of what that decision would mean for the UK. And I've said this, I don't know, countless times over the years. The whole Leave campaign was just run as broadly as possible. And if you want proof, Daniel Hannan is the perfect example, where he was on Sky News, a recorded interview where he said, someone from the Remain campaign said, no, a vote to leave is a vote to leave the single market. To which Daniel Hannan, remember, cast as the brain of Brexit, that if you've got a Brexit question, he is the person who can answer your question to show you this is why Brexit is going to be an amazing, fantastic, wonderful success. He turned around in response to that and said, no, a vote to leave is not to leave the single market and customs union, because only a fool would leave the single market and customs union. And of course, what happened after that, we saw the big Brexit wars by the Brexit Spartans. Imagine Marc Francois in a 300 costume. I know, I'm sorry, but that's how they imagine themselves, leading this great desperate charge, demanding that Article 50 be triggered almost immediately, that there be no thought or discussion about what decision that it is that has happened, that no discussion should take place, which we've seen constantly. Thankfully, for the very first time in a long time, for the past couple of months since we've had this new government, those conversations have been allowed to take place. To which, if you've been paying attention very recently, the newspapers got a bit, or at least the pro-Brexit newspapers got a bit worried and uppity recently by saying that Keir Starmer is planning to betray Brexit because he's created this new unit which is going to sort of focus on talks with relations with the European Union. The Surrender Brigade, as it's being dubbed. Because they know they are worried. They are terrified because they do not have a lot of power anymore. They are not in government. If Labour wanted to, it could force through the UK being back in the single market and customs union, and Keir Starmer could just turn around and just go, will the people? And he could use that Daniel Hannan clip like night and day and just hit every single one of them, including Daniel Hannan himself, that this is what you said countless times. And it's not just Daniel Hannan. There was Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, even Nigel Farage constantly said multiple things about how the UK could remain in these EU institutions, like the single market and customs union. But that's not what ended up happening. And as a result, we now have huge economic, political, diplomatic losses in this. And Keir Starmer deserves huge credit for rebuilding the diplomatic credit with the European Union. And I think next year we're going to see a lot more stuff happen, especially around the economic stuff next year. I really do think that. And as I've said, Ming Va strategy, be careful, slowly, move it forward. But we've also seen public attitudes changing. Like I say, you had someone on LBC who voted leave, came in and said, I didn't know what I was voting for. I would have never voted for Brexit had I known what the consequences would have been. You know? And then, of course, we are constantly now getting things like this. This from the London School of Economics. Brexit cost the UK 72 billion in lost trade in the first 2 years. 72 billion in the first 2 years. And look who it's affecting the most, because guess what? It was always going to affect small businesses the most. Guess who it is affecting? So, researchers for the London School of Economics found that the trade barriers had been a disaster for small businesses and forced thousands to stop trading with EU nations. Right? I have told you, I don't know how many countless times on this channel, the UK is a country of SMEs. SMEs, if you don't know what that acronym is, stands for small to medium enterprises. Most people, if you are employed, you are probably employed by an SME. It's not big businesses. And as we found out recently, Marks and Spencer has now had to buy a warehouse to deal with all that Brexit customs paperwork. Right? If Marks and Spencer, a massive company that it is having to buy a warehouse to house paperwork, what are other companies doing? How are other SMEs even managing to handle all of this? Well, it's easy. They're just giving up trading with the EU, which again affects their growth. And we have covered time and time again on this channel businesses that have lost out on that. One classic example, seed company, Doncaster, just down the road, lost 30% of its business. Still going, by the way, still going. It's surviving as a business, but it's lost 30% of its business because 30% of it was done selling seed to the EU. And this wasn't like, plant seeds or anything like that. It was bird seed. Given up. Too expensive. Too complicated. And yet, this is what we've seen time and time again. SMEs were always going to get the brunt of this. Always going to get the brunt. And we have talked on this channel at length about the number of SMEs that have constantly had to suffer through a lot of these problems. You saw it not too long ago on, I think it was the BBC, where you had two business owners who are like, yeah, we've got all these Brexit problems. Meanwhile, you have Lord Frost, who negotiated this Brexit deal, which they are now having problems with, going, oh, well, that's all the EU's fault. You cannot make this up. It is comedy gold. It is comedy gold. The fact that they somehow thought that the EU was like gonna not enforce its regulations and rules. Of course it was, because it always was going to do that. Any country around the world does this. It's not rocket science. But apparently, oh, well, that's all down to the EU enforcing their rules. I've always said it, the further we get on from Brexit, the worse Brexit looks, the worse it becomes, the worse the arguments are, the more people realize the damage, which we are seeing in the polls, the more you get to a position now, whereas we sort of Europeans are Europhile selves, as Daniel Hanan calls us, which again, we'll get to that in the next video. Um, you know, we now need to start really pushing. We need to start organizing. We need to start, you know, getting candidates, starting this conversation, having this stuff done. And eventually, you know, we will rejoin because it was inevitable. I said it back all the way back in 2016. Our path back to the EU has already been laid out in front of us. It's just, you know, not a matter of if, but just when. And it is just when all that starts. And I want to remind people where we are now, people were thinking we would not be at this point where we are now until like 2030. So public opinion, the economy, everything has happened a lot faster than a lot of people predicted. That means potentially the timeline of a lot of other stuff has probably been sped up as well. And I think you get this Ming-Va strategy, as I've said. I think it is basically posted to say, this is it, guys. This is Brexit. This is as best as it is going to be. Are you absolutely sure, guys, you want to continue with this? And I still think that is the plan. I really do still think that is the plan because, like I say, Keir Starmer can't just turn around and say, I am reversing Brexit. But he can, as I said, turn around and say, this is Brexit. We've tried our best to fix it as best as we possibly can to make it work. This is as best as it is ever going to be. Are you sure you want to continue with it? So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.